Good morning to some of you. I guess most of you are, it's morning. This is continuation of our Tenets class. I think this is the fourth class, right? So we're doing pretty well because I figure with 12 classes altogether, we should have like 3 classes in general for each thing. So we've already more or less finished Vaibhashika, although we're going to come back to it. And we introduced Sautrantika last time. So we've got a good way to go here. So let's begin again with a little shorter motivation this time. You know how to calm your mind. It's said in some texts that if someone is well practiced, that to eliminate the discursive thoughts in your mind, it could take as little as 3, as I say, as little as 21, watching 21 respirations that you could have, even less than that sometime if you're well practiced. So let's begin with that. Let's do very carefully watching the breathing for 7 respirations to begin to subdue the discursive thoughts. Sit comfortably, relax your body, relax your mind, and begin watching the respiration. A little bit settled. So as before, imagine your breath coming up your nostrils to the crown of your head, down toward the spine, down toward your heart chakra, and let your awareness reside there. Let go of observing the respiration and just watch your mental consciousness for a few moments. If you're like me with a lot of light shining in your face, because I wanted to, in doing these recordings, it's usually one of the things that make the pictures better. You may be disturbed by your eye consciousness, or if you've got pains in your body, you may be focusing on the body sense consciousness. Let those go. Just watch the contents of your mental consciousness. Not focusing on the thoughts or the memories or the judgments or the emotions, just noting them and letting them go. And in so doing, starting to notice moments of quiet, of spaciousness, clarity. And if you do this kind of meditation often, you may have a remembering consciousness of what we're looking for here, the clear light nature of the mind. Even when the mind's distracted or other thoughts are present, that clarity can be implied by the very presence of the thoughts. The mind is unobstructing and unobstructed by thoughts. Thoughts and emotions are not the very nature of our mind, so they are adventitious. They arise due to causes and conditions. This clarity of the mind is not the emptiness of the mind, as some might have it. This is what we're experiencing as what's called the conventional, or trying to experience is the conventional clear light nature of the mind. And it is to be apprehended by wisdom, the eye of wisdom, and the eye of gnosis, or exalted wisdom. So it's not something, it's not a mental image, although we have to approach it through a mental image, this clarity. We're developing a mental image of the clarity through this process of observing, letting go of the thoughts again and again. Having a little bit of experience of this can give you confidence that we can use this life of leisure and endowment that we have right now to develop qualities that we have not yet developed, or and certainly enhance those that we have developed, like bodhicitta and so forth. And because they are not part of the mind, not the nature of the mind, our delusions, our faults, our ignorance, our self-cherishing, all of these can be vanquished, at least at first temporarily. Eventually they can be quelled, vanquished, ceased, if you will, forever when we realize the ultimate nature of our being and our mind. Seeing that potential, think how lucky we are to have this opportunity. And then I am going to use this period of the class this morning as an exercise in obtaining knowledge, to be able to change ourselves, to develop the good qualities, and to learn how to eliminate the faults, negativities, the delusions. Not simply that we can have a more calm life, but that we can become a suitable receptacle for the good qualities of compassion, empathy, thinking of others, and eventually to develop bodhicitta, the mind which is aiming to achieve full enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. If we're fortunate and we have the right causes from previous lives, maybe even to achieve deep realizations, even enlightenment this lifetime. But at least to leave imprints so that in future lifetimes we have a kind of innate wisdom when we're born, the imprint from our developing wisdom now. I think I'm going to participate this morning, listening, contemplating, maybe questioning. And when we have some clear understanding, pausing on that, settling on that, what we call meditating on that. We're going to be doing this for the welfare of all sentient beings in order to achieve enlightenment for their sake. I'm going to participate in the class this morning. This is what is meant by motivation. And then slowly arise from that, bringing your attention to the present. And if the host would put up the prayer of Manjushri, praise of Manjushri. So Bob had mentioned last time, some people had asked what this was all about, something like that. Manjushri is said to be the personification, you might say, of all the Buddha's wisdom of emptiness and even wisdom of impermanence and other things. All the Buddha's sort of the definitive Manjushri is the wisdom that realizes emptiness. The interpretive Manjushri is when that kind of wisdom, whether it be in a person who doesn't look like Manjushri, if it's the omniscient mind of manifesting in a form like a being, that's called the deity Manjushri. So in practice, it's understood that to call upon that wisdom, to praise that wisdom, we're praising the definitive Manjushri, the wisdom of emptiness, and in so doing, accumulating merit and opening our mind to be receptive to the blessings of the omniscient mind to inspire us to develop wisdom, to empower us, what's called blessings, to be able to develop wisdom. So we're going to make this praise to Manjushri as before. There we go. Homage to my Lama and protector, Venerable Manjushri. who holds at his heart a scripture symbolic of his seeing all things as they are, whose pure genius shines like the sun unclouded by the two obscurations, who with compassion like a father for his only child teaches with 60-fold eloquence all beings imprisoned in cyclic existence, groping in the darkness of ignorance, overwhelmed by suffering. You whose thunder-like proclamation of the perfection of wisdom arouses us from the stupor of our afflictions and frees us from the iron chains of karma. You who wield a wisdom's sword, vanquishing the darkness of ignorance, hewing down our every sprout of suffering. You who are primordially pure, have gone to the end of the 10 grounds, finished the 10 grounds, the complete embodiment of every excellence, whose princely body is graced with 112 adornments. O Manjushri, to you I bow, dispel the darkness of my mind. And then we'll recite this mantra, maybe we'll do quickly, 21 times, and then after the mantra, Om Arapatsanadi, taking one deep breath, recite the seed syllable D 108 times while imagining that syllable. You can like DHI or the Tibetan syllable, the last stack there on the right of the Tibetan letters. Imagining that on the tongue, the tip of your tongue. Swallow, after reciting it 108 times, swallow, and as it goes down, imagine it goes down to your heart chakra and melds, dissolves into your subtle mind there, bringing the blessings of quick wisdom. Om Arabazanari, 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 Om Arabazanari. Marabazanari, 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 With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness of my mind's confusion. Grant me the light of self-assured intelligence that I might see into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Okay. Thank you. So does anyone have any questions before we begin? Yeah, Bob. Bob has a question.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One is sort of a general question. When I'm reading this section on Sautrantika, you know, one notices that there's two types of Sautrantika, that of Vasubandhu and that of Dharmakirti, following scripture and following reasoning. But when I actually go through the text, it looks like it's almost all Dharmakirti's philosophy. You know, do you have any feeling about this sort of division and what it is the text that we're reading is mainly focusing on?
Yeah. So generally, the Sautrantikas are considered to be identifiable as different than Vaibhashika in general. As we gave the definition of Sautrantika, how do we say here? Here it says proponent of sutra in your text, but it's actually the word proponent is not there. It's actually maybe follower of, Sautrantika, follower of the sutras, is, a sutra follower is a person propounding Hinayana tenets, lesser vehicle tenets, who accepts self-knowers and external objects. So when it says external objects, that's to help to differentiate them, say, from Chittamatra, which did not accept the existence of external objects that are a different entity than the mind. They do say that there's something that you can call external objects, but they are the entity of the mind. That's why they're called Chittamatra, only mind. Everything is only mind. And it says one who accepts self-knowers. So a little bit confusion here, because the Vaibhashikas in general do not accept self-knowers, but apparently some of the Sautrantikas do accept, do not accept self-knowers, even though it says they accept them. And those would be called those that are following scripture. It's not so much that are following Vasubandhu, but who are following the scriptures, that the Mahavibhasha, which is the scripture that the Vaibhashikas kind of defining characteristic of most of the Hinayana schools. So the Sautrantikas were a little bit more evolved, and it included some that still followed a lot of the Vaibhashika tenets, but also had some distinguishing characteristics due to the influence of Dignaga and Dharmakirti, the great logicians that wrote a lot about the Sautrantika school. Eventually, they both also explained Chittamatra. And so when they were talking about the Sautrantika school, they were setting it forth, the logic part of it that Dharmakirti had expressed. So it's a little bit, let's say, let me read a little segment here from that I was thinking to read in another context today. When we're talking about the Sautrantika's definition of an ultimate truth. And this was one of the questions Bob mentioned last time about what did it mean to ultimate truth is something which was able to perform a function ultimately, right? So this is from a text named Knowledge and Wisdom. Can you see it? Can you read it correctly? I guess mine, yeah, it's not reversed.
Yeah, I could read it correctly. Yeah, I can see it. Knowledge and liberation.
Yeah, what did I say? Knowledge and liberation. So on page 35, this is very good, by Anne Klein, who is one of the students of Jeffrey Hopkins in the earlier days, and now is a great respected translator and scholar. Nowadays, usually often talking about Dzogchen and Bompo and some of the other traditions that flourished in Tibet. So this says the two truths according to the Sautrantika following reasoning. This presentation of ultimate and conventional truths is very different from the one above, meaning the followers of scripture, so the Vaibhashika definition of ultimate truth. So there were some Sautrantikas who, and you'll see why, that said an ultimate truth was something which was cannot be, you don't lose apprehension of it if it's broken. You know, if you break something down and you no longer have an apprehension of it, that's a conventional truth. Like if you put a table through a shredder, a tree shredder, or you get out of chips, you don't recognize it as a table any longer, right? But an ultimate truth was something, if it's broken down or analyzed, you don't lose the apprehension of it. So here it's different than that. And it says, different from the one above. Here, ultimate truths are seen as synonymous with impermanent phenomena or specifically characterized phenomena. That's a way of saying particulars. And conventional truths are synonymous. Here, impermanent, specifically characterized phenomena or conventional truths are synonymous with permanent, and conventional truths are synonymous with permanent, generally characterized phenomena. You might say generalities. These pairings are based on the explication of the two truths in Dharmakirti's commentary, Pramanavartaka. So he was writing a commentary on Dignaga, his teacher's commentary on logic. Dignaga was kind of the founder. Dharmakirti came afterwards. So this statement in the third chapter of Pramanavartaka says, essentially, whatever ultimately is able to perform a function, that was our definition last time, right? Exists ultimately here. That means in this system, you might say here, whatever ultimately is able to perform a function exists ultimately. Other things, other phenomena, unable to do so, exist conventionally. This is still part of the quotation. These describe specifically and generally characterized phenomena. And so in one interpretation of this, it's said that the term ultimately able to perform a function is actually defining specifically characterized phenomena, and not doing so, not able to perform a function ultimately is describing generally characterized phenomena. So what does that mean? Specifically characterized means something that has its own specific characteristics. That is to say, that can be identified by some unique characteristics of it, as opposed to generally characterized phenomena, which have no specific characteristic with respect to them. So like, say, for instance, my tablet here, my iPad or my iPhone is a specifically characterized phenomena, even though it has some general characteristics like impermanence that are shared with other things. It has its own specific characteristics of shape and color and activity and so forth, whereas generally characterized phenomena do not. So in describing about this, it's a little bit like talking about this particular approach is differentiating these two schools of Sautrantika is kind of like the particular take of the Gelugpa tradition. Some of the other traditions, the Sakyapa and others, don't agree exactly in this separation. Let me just read a little bit more. Gelugpa writers agree that in the system of Sautrantika, following reasoning, those are followers of Dharmakirti and Dignaga, ultimate truth and specifically characterized phenomena are synonymous. So those things that are able to perform a function, like my iPhone or a tree or something like that, those are ultimate truths. However, some consider Dharmakirti's phrase above, quote, ultimately able to perform a function, or as our text said, able to perform a function ultimately, just different, same words, just put in different order. Some, however, consider Dharmakirti's phrase, ultimately able to perform a function, to be the definition of an ultimate truth. Others see this phrase as a definition of specifically characterized phenomenon, and therefore not the definition of an ultimate truth, because a phrase can state the actual definition of only one defined object. So if you talk about two things that are synonyms, ultimate truth and specifically characterized phenomena, they both have their own definition, which only applies to it. So there's some debate about that. Still, even those Gelugpas who take the phrase ultimately able to perform a function as stating the definition of a specifically characterized phenomenon agree that this refers to or describes ultimate truth, even if it's the definition of specifically characterized phenomena, inasmuch as these are synonyms with specifically characterized phenomena. Whatever is one is the other. So I won't go any more there. If you're interested, you can look, see if you can find this book, Knowledge and Liberation. And as I said, page 36, 37, it comes through there quite a bit. So let me just say one more thing, Bob, first. So when we talk about ultimate truths, one way of understanding it is, rather than using that definition, ultimately able to perform a function, is it's an object of an ultimate mind. So for Sautrantika, an ultimate mind is direct perception. Direct perception. So direct perception means for Sautrantika is something which realizes an impermanent object. Direct perception has only impermanent objects as its sphere, so to speak, what it realizes. Mahayana, so in other words, although the mental consciousness can perceive some impermanent phenomena, it doesn't perceive them for more than one thought instant, according to Sautrantika. So they become almost unascertained. They're lost in the they just appear for a second and you don't notice them. They're what are called objects that appear but are not ascertained, or inattentive perception. We have inattentive perception of them. So that's one way of understanding an ultimate truth, is something which is an object of ultimate consciousness. And ultimate consciousness means direct perceiver. So we'll get into that more. Now you have another, Bob, you wanted to follow that up with another question? Or more detail about that?
Let me unmute myself. Yeah, I mean, my question of it is that, for the Vaibhashika, the only things that are ultimate truths are these partless particles, so to speak. And for Dharmakirti, I've heard two different things. And so the question of it is does he agree that for material objects, for example, it has to be a partless particle? But the way it's defined here, it seems like gross objects like pots or any tables or things like that can be an ultimate truth. So how do you read it? Do you think that the the followers of reasonings are saying that pots are ultimate truths, or do you think that they would require to be atoms?
This is a little bit speculative, even though the text that we're reading makes it very clear that pots and trees and so forth, things that have parts, are ultimate truths. Still, if you read, like say in Anne Klein's book that I just mentioned, if you go through those sections, you can see that there is, especially in the Sakya tradition and some others, they read it differently, that maybe in one sense only the smallest particles are ultimate truths, but still they accept the composition of them, a composition of ultimate, of indestructible parts, partless atoms, still to be specifically characterized phenomena. So it's a little bit, it's from the Prasangika point of view, from the Madhyamaka point of view and Prasangika Madhyamaka, all of these, because of not getting at what the Buddha actually taught, the actual meaning, they're kind of a hodgepodge of things that have internal contradictions. So the Prasangika could point out internal contradictions of both of these statements. Okay, for the Prasangika, for the Madhyamaka in general, ultimate truths have a completely different meaning. Okay, so this, if you see internal contradictions here in the Sautrantika, great scholars who have studied this also saw those same contradictions and tried to set forth what looked like their position. So it looks like their position in general is that phenomena can be either ultimate truths or conventional truths. And for them, ultimate truths are the objects of direct perception. Okay, so let's see that there's a lot more to be said about that. If we had a class every day, 5 days a week for 3 months, we could go into more detail about this, but we're just 1 day a week for 3 months. So we don't, 12 classes. We don't have that much leisure to go into that much detail, but you can read about that. And it is very, very interesting. Someone else have a question? Maybe don't be intimidated by the sophistication of Bob's question. If you want to ask something that seems like, oh, I better not ask that because Bob's question was so sophisticated. Yeah, over my head. No, please feel free. Anyone have something? Yarpel? Tenzin Jiangchu. Oh, wait. Well, Yarpel first.
Last week I had a question I didn't really get answered, I don't think. When it says that in the Great Expedition School, when the practitioner eliminates all the negativities and actually realizes emptiness, it says that the continuum of his body and the continuum of his consciousness are severed.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Okay.
What does it mean, severed? Does it come to an end, or?
Right. It comes to an end. So this is one of the famous things of the Hinayana schools. Although the Sautrantika, I think the Sautrantika generally accepts the same thing. It's only in the Mahayana that we find that when you said realizes emptiness, they generally don't say emptiness in these schools. In fact, if you look in the Hinayana canon, in the Hinayana sutras in general, and I'm not talking about the Mahavibhasha, but just the sutras that are preserved in the Pali canon, the word emptiness doesn't occur very often at all. And when it does, it refers to like the emptiness of a temple that is empty of monks. That's not what Mahayana means by emptiness. Okay, so but let's say when one becomes an arhat, when one is not only realized emptiness and become a superior being, an Arya, but one has continued that meditation for some time on the path of meditation and ceased more and more of the subtle afflictions, the afflictive emotions. When all of them are ceased, one is called an arhat. The Tibetan etymology of that is one who's destroyed the foes, the foe destroyer. Others, if you just look at the Sanskrit, you can interpret it other ways, but that's generally how the Mahayana takes it. So when one has become an arhat, one has achieved a nirvana, that is a passing beyond sorrow. Even if you have contaminated aggregates yet, which are have been impelled by past karma, you are passed beyond sorrow because your mind no longer reacts to suffering. Like the example I gave last time of the Buddha feigning, from Mahayana point of view, pretending to be sick and having a fever, and the monks who were putting cold compresses on his head or his body asked how he was feeling, and he said, there are great waves of pain coursing through the Buddha's body, but his mind is at ease, kind of talking in the third person, right? Talking about himself as the Buddha. So from the Hinayana point of view, when one dies, generally an ordinary person dies, their continuum does not cease. They will be again reborn, reincarnated, if you want. They're not always incarnate, that is, with meat, with flesh. So maybe rebirth is better, because you could be born in the formless realm without any kind of flesh, without any carne. So reincarnated may not be the right word, maybe reborn. You will be reborn due to the fact that you have karma that still impels you into the future. For someone who has eliminated all of that karma, no longer has the actualizing factor to cause that karma to impel you in the future, because you no longer have self-grasping at the time of death. It seems like there is no longer a continuum of that contaminated existence. So the Hinayana, many of the Hinayana interpreted that to mean that the mind ceases at that time, that goes away, no longer exists. So once the Buddha died, passed into parinirvana, there was no longer a continuum of the Buddha's body, because the mind had separated from that, and the mind no longer exists. So they took that to mean, the word nirvana, one way of the etymology of that, the Sanskrit word, is to snuff out, like a candle that's snuffed out. There's no longer a flame, to transfer to another candle with other wax, other carne, or other existence. The Mahayana takes the etymology, though, to mean not the snuffing out of the continuum, but the snuffing out of the delusions, the afflictions. So it's only in the Mahayana that you find that when one has achieved the goal, either arhatship of a hearer or a solitary realizer, or Buddhahood, the enlightenment of Buddhahood, Bodhi. For the Hinayana, once one has died from that final existence, when one has achieved that state, one no longer is, there's no longer a continuum of your consciousness. So there would not be the reincarnation of Buddhas. For them, Shakyamuni Buddha passed away and no longer exists. Although his prayers and the prayers of arhats and solitary realizers that they made while they were alive can still have efficacy in the future, even though their minds have ceased. Okay, does that kind of answer your question, or is it still something?
I have a hard time understanding the logic about how the continuum could come to an end. It's like, if it seems like if it can come to an end, then it had to have a beginning. You know, we're always, you know, thinking that this mental continuum has no beginning.
Well, we can say there are things that have no beginning but have an end, like the continuum of delusions.
Yes, yes, yes.
They had no beginning because there was no beginning to our previous lives, but they do have an end. They are what the Mahayana would say is what's snuffed out at the time of nirvana, not the continuum of the mental, of the consciousness, you know, the continuum of the person. So you're well trained in the Mahayana, so there are different possibilities. There are things that have no beginning but have an end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something.
Like the delusions. There are things that have no beginning and no end. From the Mahayana point of view, like the consciousness, because even in Buddhahood, one's consciousness continues.
Yes.
There are things that have, what do we say? No begin. So we have two things with no beginning with an end, no beginning, and no end, and things that have a beginning and have an end, you know, like, you know, your pot came into existence when the potter made it, and it goes out of existence when it cracks and you've thrown it in the garbage and it gets tossed in the landfill. There are things that have a beginning, and no end, like, say, the realization of emptiness. Once you've realized that directly, that realization, or say the achievement of Buddhahood, let's put it that way. Once you've achieved Buddhahood, you no longer lose that. It has no end, because the consciousness, the Buddhist consciousness, continues. Okay, let me go over to Tenzin. Jiangchu had a question, I think. Tenzin?
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Oh, okay. My question had to do with, was having some confusion about the difference between being able to perform a function and being an ultimate truth. Because in my other studies, I'm thinking that what able to perform a function is an impermanent phenomena and therefore isn't an ultimate truth. So I'm trying to understand where my confusion. What school are we studying that is positing this, and how and where is it different, and what version of Mahayana is it different from? I guess that's
different. It's different than both the Chittamatra and Madhyamaka schools of Mahayana. We're coming to them later. So here it's interesting that the terms conventional truth and ultimate truth have such diametrically opposed interpretations or meanings according to the various schools. We talked before about Vaibhashika said an ultimate truth was something which was, unbreakable, that it didn't lose its identity in when it was analyzed or when it was broken into parts. Whereas here, an ultimate truth in the Sautrantika school, they take ultimate truth as an object of an ultimate consciousness. So this is kind of the play here. In Sautrantika, an ultimate consciousness is direct perception as opposed to a conceptual mind. Do you know the difference between direct perception and conception? So direct perception like say with our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our body consciousness, has a particular direct apprehension of something. Vaibhasha can take it a little bit differently. Direct perception actually goes out to the object, but here, direct for Sautrantika and above, direct perceptions are ones that, by the force of the object appearing to you, the specifically characterized phenomena, the impermanent phenomena appearing to you, a consciousness is generated in that aspect, so to speak. You know that thing directly. Whereas for conception, which is a way of knowing which is exclusive to the mental consciousness, conceptual mind, right? What other ways do we use, we call that? We know things, we can know things correctly. Like, for instance, you can imagine your mother's face. You have a conceptual understanding of your mother's face. You might even say it appears, if your eyes are getting bad, like mine are getting bad, you might even say the conception is clearer than looking at your mother's face with your eyes. But it is that understanding that comes to your mind when you remember something, when you think of something, or maybe it doesn't have to be remembering something in the past, imagining something in the future, imagining something that's happening right now, imagining what someone looks like that you haven't seen before. You know that through what's called a meaning generality, or generally what we generally would call in common parlance a mental image. You have a mental image of your mother's face. That mental image is not something which is existing outside. It's existing within your consciousness. It's an object that your consciousness essentially creates. Maybe verbally there'll be some fault there, because the mental image is something that's for all of these schools is considered to be permanent phenomena. So generally you wouldn't say a permanent phenomena is created, but it's something that's called up. That mental image is called up when you want to think about something. And it's as though you know your mother's face by means of that mental image. That mental image is what's called the appearing object of conception. The appearing object of a perception, direct perception, let's say, the appearing object is something that you actually that you perceive barely, directly, without the intermediary of anything else. You just see, I see out my windows the trees, the forest out there. With a conceptual mind, you are knowing something by means of a mental image of it. Your mother's face is not actually casting an image to your conception. A little bit like this. You know those things that used to have when some of the older ones of us were kids. You would have a little thing with two eyepieces, and you'd put a card inside with different pictures of the Grand Canyon or the Eiffel Tower. What do they call those? Stereo. You know what I'm talking about? Someone who's older. Rowena, what were those things called? You don't know? Yarpo?
The name, I remember them from my grandmother gave me some.
Yeah, you'd have a set of different things you could put in.
Stereoscope.
National stereoscope?
Yes.
Something like that. So you're knowing, so you're knowing the Eiffel Tower, not by seeing the actual Eiffel Tower, but by looking through an image of the Eiffel Tower. Your eye consciousness is not focusing on the actual film right there, but it's as though it's focusing at a distance beyond the film. And so you're knowing the Eiffel Tower by means of that image. A little bit like that in terms of conceptual mind. Conceptual mind knows its objects by means of a mental image. It's not like a physical thing in that stereoscope or whatever. It's something that is conjured up, is brought to mind when you think of your mother. Let's say you think of her face. I'm thinking of my mother's face right now, and as though to my mind I see it clearly. It's not seeing with the eye consciousness. This kind of knowing is not an ultimate mind for the Sautrantika school, conceptual mind. It's not an ultimate mind. Only direct perception is an ultimate mind, because the conceptual mind is mistaken in a certain way. It mistakes the mental image for the actual object. You're not actually seeing, so to speak, your mother's face. You're not actually perceiving your mother's face. You're knowing your mother's face by means of this mental image. And so it is mistaken with respect to its appearing object. What's appearing to the conception is a mental image of your mother's face, using the example of mother's face here that you're knowing. So for Sautrantika, only direct perception is an ultimate mind. So because direct perceptions for the Sautrantika, again, this is limited to them, direct perceptions only can take impermanent objects, specifically characterized phenomena. Ultimate truths can only take those as its objects. They're called ultimate minds. And the conceptual mind is a conventional mind. It knows conventionalities, things that are limited to being labeled by your mind, constructed by your conception. So Tenzin Zhangzhu, does that touch your question, or did that miss your question?
I think it helps, but now I have to spend some more time trying to understand conventional mind versus ultimate mind,
Right.
and
This
how
is,
that.
so
yeah.
this is from the point of view of the Sautrantika. So again, as you get later into the Mahayana schools, many of us probably have heard more teachings about Madhyamaka or maybe even Prasangika than any of these other schools. So it seems radically different what we mean by a conventional mind and an ultimate mind. There is a similarity in that in Prasangika, an ultimate mind is one that realizes the ultimate nature of phenomena, which means its emptiness of being inherently existent. That would be called an ultimate mind. So they do use that terminology. They might even define an ultimate truth that way. The object that is perceived by an ultimate mind means a direct perception of ultimate truth. But for here, in the Sautrantika, an ultimate truth doesn't mean the absence of inherent existence, but an ultimate truth is something which is able to perform a function and is perceived by the ultimate mind. That means a direct perception. Okay, so I remember Geshe Nawandarge used to say when we studied in India many years ago with him at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, Geshe Darge was a disciple of Trijang Rinpoche, one of the great teachers, both Sutra and Tantra. He spent the last years of his life in New Zealand teaching on the southern island down there. Anyway, Geshe Darge used to say there are many, many different, let's say if you use the word Dharma, there are many definitions, many meanings of the word Dharma. Maybe at least 13 different meanings of the word Dharma. Like we talk about the 8 worldly dharmas or the holy Dharma, or Dharma can also mean phenomena, that which upholds itself and so forth. Or in the Hindu tradition, especially, your Dharma is your duty. You have a certain duty in life that you have to uphold. You have to be a householder, you have to be parents, and so forth, different stages of life. Analyzing all of these different things, when we talk about the Dharma, getting a clearer and clearer understanding of these, and it takes time. This is something that brings about deep wisdom, it's said. So that when you read the scriptures, knowing something about what the subject matter is talking about from other studies that you've made, you can get a better understanding of what they're meaning. So all of this grappling with what seems to be, almost, and sometimes almost seems like useless complications and so forth, all of it has great virtue. You're creating virtuous karma with the motivation of understanding these things for the benefit of helping sentient beings, liberating them by yourself eventually becoming Buddha. So let me leave unless someone has a super urgent question, let's leave that for a moment and continue on in the text, okay? So we're talking about the Sautrantikas, you could say followers of sutra. Here it says proponent. Usually proponent is like someone who speaks a certain way. There's a Tibetan word, mawa, that means to propound or to assert a certain system of school. Here it's just a follower of the sutras. That kind of sense is that they don't accept a separate Abhidharma, the set of treatises that the Vaibhashikas accepted as being the word of the Buddha. Have you heard of Abhidharma before? Did we mention it before? Didn't we mention that, Bob? The word Abhidharma. Abhidharma can mean higher knowledge. So there were the Buddha said all of his teachings were included in 3 baskets. The basket of Vinaya, the rules of monastic discipline and morality and so forth of the layperson. The basket or the container of the sutras, his discourses, the Sutra Pitaka, so the Vinaya Pitaka, the Sutra Pitaka, and the Abhidharma Pitaka, the collection of his teachings on higher wisdom. There were 7 treatises that the Vaibhashikas considered to be the Abhidharma Pitaka. And even though they had authors like Shariputra and so forth, they considered them to be the word of the Buddha. Although the Sautrantikas would say that they were not the word of the Buddha. They were sometimes in error about that. There were some mistakes in them. And they said one should only follow the Sutra Pitaka for that within the Sutra Pitaka, you would find all of the higher knowledge, the Buddhist teachings about higher knowledge. So that's another way of saying why they're called Sautrantikas, to differentiate them from the Vaibhashikas and so forth. who accepted these 7 treatises on Abhidharma. I've never seen the term Darstantika used. Here, that's one of the, when it talks about the definition, it says, proponent of sutra, Sautrantika, and exemplifier, Darshantika, are equivalent. I've never seen that term used, Darshantika. But anyway, that's apparently that was by some. So next one, the divisions. Generally, we say there are followers of scripture and followers of reasoning. So in the Sautrantika, with those, what I said before, somewhat complicated factors, whether they can be differentiated so clearly. Some Sautrantikas would tend to follow Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha. Here it's called Treasury of Higher Knowledge. It's not manifest knowledge so much as higher knowledge. The followers of reasoning were said to be of sharper intellect and were followers of these texts by Dharmakirti and Dignaga, especially Dharmakirti's 7 treatises on valid cognition. So maybe you've heard this word before, follower of reasoning, in another context. Sometimes when we talk about, in the Mahayana, generating bodhicitta, we say that there are two kinds of two kinds of people who develop bodhicitta. Those who are of lesser faculties, not sharp faculties, you might even say dull faculties, and those who are of sharper faculties. Okay, those who are of less sharp faculties, and the main faculty here means not the faculties of eye and ear and nose and so forth, although those can be called faculties. They're talking about the faculties of wisdom and mindfulness and so forth, mainly wisdom. So those of sharp wisdom develop bodhicitta first by realizing selflessness and emptiness. They first have a realization of that. And then by understanding that there is no self that we've been clinging to from beginningless time, there's no self to cherish, they're able to have the courage of practicing exchanging self and others and developing bodhicitta very rapidly that way. They're called followers, they're called sharp faculties. They're also called followers of reasoning, but not the same meaning in this text. They're not followers necessarily of Dignaga, but they do follow reasoning and they can develop bodhicitta more quickly that way. Those of lesser faculties, not as sharp faculties, you might even say dull, are more prone to develop bodhicitta more slowly by the method of the seven points of cause and effect. You know what those are? Recognizing all sentient beings have been your mother, remembering their kindness, developing the will to repay their kindness, seeing them as heartwarming, which is called affectionate love, not fully fledged love. Great compassion, that's 5. Exceptional thought, or universal responsibility, and then actual bodhicitta. So those of, that's the main methodology that the followers of faith, they're called followers of faith as opposed to followers of reasoning. So you may have heard the term followers of reasoning in that context. Here, the followers of reasoning in the Sautrantika, as opposed to the followers of scripture, the followers of reasoning are the followers of Dignaga and Dharmakirti. Okay. And so why are they called Sautrantikas? they're called Sautrantikas since they explain the tenets through following the sutras of the Bhagavan, the Buddhist sutras, not the they don't depend on the seven Abhidharma treatises that are enshrined in the Pali Canon. Okay. And then the way of asserting objects. This is where we were more or less last time. So here, anything that exists has to be either a conventional truth or an ultimate truth. Actually, even Nagarjuna said that all phenomena that exist are either conventional truths or ultimate truths. But the meaning of what conventional and ultimate truths are was quite different. Here they're dividing up say the pizza pie. You remember the example I gave? You can cut it in various ways. You can cut it in the Sautrantika meaning of conventional truth, or you can cut it in the and ultimate truth, or you can cut it in half according to how Prasangika understands it. So the definition of an ultimate truth is a phenomenon that is ultimately able to perform a function, or you could say that is able to perform a function ultimately. And the emphasis here on ultimately, I think Bob had mentioned last time, some people are saying, what does it mean to perform a function ultimately? That means to an ultimate mind. That means you can actually perceive that with direct perception. Ultimate truth, truly established, thing, product, impermanent phenomena, compounded phenomena, substance, and specifically characterized phenomena are synonyms. Here it says equivalent. There's another distinction to be made here when we talk about things that are identical and things that are equivalent or synonyms. Say, for instance, let's say, what's the Spanish word for dog? It's perro, isn't it? Am I forgetting? Perro. You guys must know in New Mexico.
Pero.
Perro. Okay, I get the right pronunciation. Perro. Tibetan word.
Two R's in it.
Perro.
Yeah, that's a her part. Has two R's.
It's 2 R's, right? In perro.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Tibetan word for dog is ki, like you would write KYI, ki. So are perro, ki, and dog the same? Are they one and the same? Mutually inclusive? What do you think, Bob?
Different words, but mutually inclusive for the phenomena that they point to.
Okay, I think that they're in the way that these translators in the FPMT are translating, there's two things: chik, which means one, or you could say identical, and donchik, which means one meaning, same meaning, or mutually inclusive. So those are donchik, right? They're referring to the same object, one meaning. Perro, dog, ki, whatever else. I don't know other languages. How do you say dog in French? Does anyone know? Okay, doesn't matter. So all of those would be donchik, or one meaning, or mutually inclusive. They're not identical because to be identical, they have to be identical in meaning. They have to be donchik. They have to be mutually inclusive, but they also have to have the same name, the same word, to be identical. They have to be identical in all ways. So these so-called synonyms or mutually inclusive things, ultimate truth, truly established, thing, product, impermanent phenomena. Let's take product and impermanent phenomena. They refer to the same thing. Impermanent phenomena, right? They're referring to the same thing, except even though they're mutually inclusive, they still are not the same. So that when you say product, that means like something that's produced by causes and conditions, a different mental image has to bring about that verbalization. When you say that, a certain mental image comes to your mind. When you say impermanent, if you understand the meaning of it, it means something that's momentary, that only exists one instant, and then the next instant it's changed, right? Although they are equivalent, if it is a product of causes and conditions, it's impermanent. And if it's impermanent, it's a product of causes and conditions. Still, they have different mental images to the mind. So in the proof, let's say, in proving that sound is impermanent, you know what, you have to prove that to someone, right? Do you think sound is impermanent? Maybe some people think it's permanent. In the proof of sound is impermanent, you can use a logical reason or sign that it's a product. Sound is impermanent because it's a product. Like you can see with your eye that if you ring a bell, and the bell somewhere else, which a sound comes about, and that sound comes about because of the sound is produced because of causes and conditions, the clangor hitting the side of the bell and so forth. Even though product is mutually inclusive with impermanent, you can still use it to prove impermanent, because understanding one word doesn't necessarily bring up the other meaning, the meaning of the other word. Thinking that something is a product doesn't necessarily bring to mind that it is impermanent. Okay, so there are two different things. Things that are mutually inclusive or identical, and things that are one and the same, or what did we say? Yeah, one and the same, identical, or things that are mutually inclusive, which can have different names. Here, the definition of conventional truth for the Sautrantika is a phenomenon that is not ultimately able to perform a function. And among conventional truths, the synonyms of it are conventional truth, falsely established, permanent phenomena, generally characterized phenomena. So when we talk about specifically characterized and generally characterized phenomena, here specifically characterized phenomena are things that are impermanent. Remember, I said that means that they have their own specific characteristics that identify them, that those specific characteristics can only be apprehended directly by direct perception. If you think about something that is specifically characterized, you'll have a mental image of it, which is that mental image is something which is not changing. You know that specifically characterized phenomena by means of its mental image. but the what is appearing to your mind is a generally characterized phenomena, that is the mental image. Another way of dividing existence, all things that exist are either ultimate truths or conventional truths. We said that there were, yeah. So another way of dividing is into negative and positive phenomena. Negatives and positives. So this, if I refer to this as if I refer to someone said pot, and I handed them my glasses, they would say, that's not a pot. Not a pot is a negative phenomena. You're excluding or negating something. You're knowing something by means of a negation. Negative phenomena and positive phenomena. Positive phenomena are known without the need to explicitly negate anything for their apprehension. So here, the definition of a negative phenomena is an object that's realized, understood, by the awareness apprehending it, by means of eliminating that which is being negated, the object of negation. Can you think of a negative phenomena? Well, there's two kinds. They're called non-affirming negations and affirming negations, according to this school. According to the Vaibhashika, there are the only kind of negations that exist. They're all, for Vaibhashika also, there are negative and positive phenomena. But according to them, the only kind of negations that exist are affirming negations. When you in negating something, you affirm something else in its place. So here, the definition of a positive phenomena is an object realized by an awareness apprehending it by way of not eliminating its object of negation. It appears directly to the phenomena, directly to your consciousness. Well, I say not directly to your consciousness. It doesn't appear to your sense consciousnesses. You don't know negative phenomena by means of the sense consciousness. You know negative phenomena by means of the mental consciousness, by conception. Illustrations of a non-affirming negation or negative are uncompounded space, you know what uncompounded space means? No. Uncompounded space means space which is just understood by the mental consciousness, by conception, as being the absence of obstructing contact. That is something that exists. There is no obstructing contact here in front of me other than the air molecules and so forth. We would say there's some space there, but you don't realize that absence of obstructing consciousness with the eye consciousness. Uncompounded space means the mere lack of obstructing contact. It's non-affirming because it is in saying that there's no contact there, you're not affirming something else in its place. Like say, for instance, an affirming negation, well, I'll give a classic example that comes later in the Madhyamaka. the fat Devadatta who does not eat at night. The fat Devadatta who does not eat at night. That is an example of an affirming negation. Why? Because it has a negation in it. He does not eat at night, unless Devadatta is given to a girl. Usually Devadatta is a boy's name. Devidatta would be the girl. Okay. Devadatta, the fat Devadatta who does not eat at night. That's negating something about Devadatta. He does not eat at night. What is affirmed? What is affirmed in that? That's called an affirming negation. Jeremy, you think you have an answer?
Oh, Devadatta only eats during the day.
Yeah. So indirectly, although it doesn't state it directly, indirectly one knows if he's fat, he must eat during the day. So according to the Vaibhashikas, there were no non-affirming negations. Any negation always would affirm something else in its place. So when they say, for Vaibhashika, when they say space, they wouldn't say space is the mere lack of obstructing contact. They would say it's the lack of obstructing contact. So non-affirming negations and affirming negations, or negatives, non-affirming negatives and affirming negatives. Illustration of non-affirming negatives are, for example, uncompounded space, true cessations, and emptiness. Generally, in the Abhidharma, they don't talk about emptiness as being a permanent phenomena. They say permanent phenomena are space and the two cessations. Remember when we talked about cessations before, two kinds of cessations? Analytical cessations, which means something has ceased so that will never come back through wisdom, like the cessations that come about in the mind stream of the hearers and solitary realizers, bodhisattvas. Due to wisdom, realizing selflessness, they cease the delusion so they never come back. Non-analytical cessations are the temporary cessation of something due to lacking its conditions, like the fact that there is no, I don't want to say there's no anger in your mind right now, because there might be, listening to these complicated subjects, but say you have the seed of anger in your mind. When the conditions for the arisal of that seed into full-flown anger, when there are not those conditions, that is not an analytical cessation of anger. That's just an occasional or non-analytical cessation of anger. Okay? Here it says illustrations of non-affirming negations are uncompounded space, true cessations, analytical cessations, and emptinesses. So also in the Mahayana, we would say that non-analytic, that we would say that emptinesses are non-affirming negations. When you negate that a phenomena is inherently existent, which is the meaning of emptiness, the lack of inherent existence, you're not affirming any other kind of existence in its place. So what appears to your mind is a mere vacuity, just a lack. You're not affirming something else in its place. If you say the illustrations of affirming negations, the opposite of a non-thing. Okay, here's it. another complicated bone to chew on. The opposite of a non-thing. What is a non-thing? Or let me put it more concretely. What is a non-cow? Is this a non-cow? My glasses? Yeah. Is this a non-cow? Yeah. My mug. I'm a non-cow. George is a non-cow. Non-cow is everything other than cow itself. Right? Does that make sense? Let me see some of the faces. Made sense to Doris, I think, right? How about Nadine? Does that make sense? Non-cow. So when we say, then we say this other thing, the opposite of non-cow, or here, opposite of non-thing. So what does opposite mean here? In Tibetan, it said, Mayimpa le lokpa. Lokpa means opposite or reverse. Mayimpa means, say, yeah, Bumpa Mayimpa le lokpa would mean the opposite of a non-vase. What is a non-vase? Everything else other than vase itself. So that's, if you think in terms of Venn diagrams, that would be all existence other than those little places in space and time where vases exist. Everything else is the opposite of vase, is a non-vase, right? Now, what if you take the opposite of that? You come back to, you point out the vases, all those little spots in the three-dimensional or four-dimensional Venn diagram that you've envisioned in space and time. You know, non-vase was everything, it is everything other than vase. So there would only be the only little circles or void places you'd have would be where there were vases. Everything else is a non-vase. When you take the opposite of that, you come back to just those little places, the vases themselves. Yarpol, does that make sense? You've heard that before, right? Opposite of non-vase. Okay. Anyone have, yeah, Tenzin.
Would you repeat the construction in Tibetan from, you said boom, you used about 5 Tibetan syllables together.
Right.
Would you say that
Bumpa.
again so I could
Yeah.
write it down?
Yeah. Bumpa, like B-U-M-P-A. Bumpa means vase. Bumpa. Mayimpa. Ma is a negative particle. It means not. Yimpa means is. So is not. Mayimpa. Mayimpa means is not. Bumpa, Mayimpa. Lay. Lay means from. Lokpa means opposite. This is opposite, or you could say opposite to or opposite from a non-vase. Bumpa ma yinpa lay, I mean L-A or L-A-S in Tibetan, you might write L-A-Y phonetically. Bumpa ma yinpa lay lokpa, L-O-G-P-A. Lokpa means opposite or reverse. So reverse from a non-vase, or the opposite to a non-vase. So the non-vase gets everything else other than the vase. The opposite of that comes back, you reverse from that, you get just the vases themselves. So it's a way of pointing out a vase, in an intellectual way of pointing out a vase, kind of isolating the vase intellectually. That's kind of the meaning of what we will come later when we talk about isolates. It's not the definition of an isolate, but it's kind of like how the mind comes to think about vase. If you have a mental image of a vase, it's kind of like the opposite of a non-vase. You might say, oh, that's not how my mind knows vase. I just know vase because I remember it
Mm.
or something. But when you enunciate vase, you have to know, you have to have a mental image of vase. And that mental image is a permanent phenomena, which is not the vase itself. The mental image is something that you're knowing the vase, like that little stereo vision thing. You're knowing the vase via the mental image of the vase. The mental image of the vase is said to mean the opposite of a non-vase. So somehow you have some kind of conceptual image of a vase by means of reversing from a non-vase. You might think, wow, if I had to do for everything that I thought about, I had to make the non that and then reverse from that, my mind would be too busy. But so logically, in Dharmakirti's logic, Dignaga's logic, this is how it's said that this is one way of understanding what a mental image is. It's like the opposite of a non-thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, here even it says, and the appearance of the opposite of a non-pot to a conception apprehending pot. So conception apprehending pot means you're thinking about pot and you're knowing pot. That conception can be correct. You can actually know the pot, but you're not knowing it like in direct perception by it directly appearing to you. You're knowing it by means of this mental image, technically called a meaning generality. So the appearance of the opposite of a non-pot. So the opposite of a non-pot was this just thing that was the pot, right? The appearance of that to a conception apprehending pot. That's kind of the mental image of the pot. Too much? Jeremy, what do you think? Is he okay?
Very helpful.
Okay. I'm not sure. Nadine, completely lost? Okay. Losam Dunjob, you've heard this before, right? Opposite, you may not have heard this presentation before. So this is very, one of the prerequisites to studying Dura, studying tenets that we're studying, Drupta, is a study of a set of texts called Collected Topics, or Dudra in Tibetan. It's what the young boys and girls would study first of all, collected topics. And in that, many of these words that we're talking about, like identical and mutually inclusive or synonym, and all of these kind of things, including Mayimpa Leiloka, the opposite of a non-thing. All of these things would be included, sort of introducing them so these terms would be known when you study these topics. Okay, so that's negative phenomena, negative things, negatives and positives. Positives, negative things are those things that are known by means of eliminating its object of negation. So then they're another way of dividing up the pizza pie of existent phenomena. Single phenomena and different phenomena. So this, you might think, why are we going all of these different? This is very, very important when we talk about the reasonings to establish emptiness. If a phenomena exists, if a phenomenon exists, or if phenomena exist, two things exist, they either have to be identical, one, single, or different. Can you think of any situations when let's say, we'll take two things, for example, A and B. We haven't, they've got curtains in front of them. I'm not labeling, the things are not called A and B because they would be different. They're different names. But behind the curtains labeled A and B, there are two things. You don't know what they are. You pull up the curtain, both of them are Mercedes X type or something, same color, exactly the same. Maybe even the same vehicle looked in a mirror or something like that. Those would be the same. Different would be, and if you pull up the curtain, there's a Mercedes and a Volkswagen or something like that. They're different, right? Why is it come important later? When we talk about emptiness, say if we talk about selflessness, emptiness of the self, the personal self, we say that if the self exists, because we're talking about existent things here, we're cutting it into single, identical or different. If the self exists, it has to either be identical to the aggregates or different than the aggregates, right? There's no third choice. If you're talking about two things, they have to be either identical or different. So in the Prasangika, when we try to establish emptiness or the selflessness of persons, this is one of the ways of reasoning that can be used, that the self is either identical to the aggregates or different than the aggregates. So this topic is of very, very useful importance later on. I won't go into the subtle points of that now, because you have to add some other words like that. They have to be in, from Prasangika point of view, if a self was inherently existent, it would have to be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different than the aggregates. But here we're just introducing the idea of same or different, or what are we calling here? Yeah, single or different, same or different. So there are two types of single phenomena. This is a little bit esoteric. There's so many pages, so many lines here talking about this false singles and true singles. I've never seen that utilized, but there must be some reason that the author put it in. So there are two types of single phenomena: false singles and true singles. So this may be the reason this is introduced here, is because some terminology. Example of false single is object of knowledge and generally characterized phenomena. So that doesn't mean that it's not there. Those are two words. So each one of them is supposed to be a false single: object of knowledge and generally characterized phenomena. Why are they said to be false singles? Anyone want to venture a guess? Drundrup, is that your thinking? No, yeah. Roanna, what do you think? False singles. Well, first of all, object of knowledge is a term, right? An expression. Object of knowledge is it, generally speaking, is it a generality or a particular object of knowledge? What do you think, Bob?
It's a generality.
Generally, it's a generality, right? Actually, you could say it's a particular of even bigger set. What would the bigger set that object of knowledge is a particular of?
Existent.
No, objective knowledge and
Oh, that
existence
is
are
an
synonyms.
yeah.
It's one of these things that it doesn't come to mind immediately. You could say the selfless. The selfless includes existence and non-existence. Even things that don't exist are selfless. They're empty. So you could say the selfless is a generality that includes existence and non-existence. Existence, one of the synonyms is objects of knowledge. So, but in general, object of knowledge is a generality. What are the particulars of objects of knowledge? And permanent things, you know, blue pot, red pot, Mercedes, you know, all of these things are particulars of objects of knowledge. Anything that can be known is an object of knowledge. So object of knowledge is a generality. Why is that said to be a false single? It's called a single phenomena here because it's one word. It's just like a term. Okay. Why is that called a false single? Because it's not really single because it has particularities? I'll give you a hint. Yarpel is anticipating. Why is it called a false single? Well, it's due to sort of a terminological, what's the word, standardization in Buddhism. If a generality includes permanent and impermanent phenomena, you give the name of that generality is categorized as permanent, even though it includes impermanent things. Permanent things take precedence when labeling a generality as permanent or impermanent. When we talk about true singles, example of a true single is thing and impermanent phenomena. For Sautrantika, thing only refers to impermanent phenomena, right? It's a synonym of impermanent phenomena, thing. You could say functioning thing. So it doesn't include permanent and impermanent. So it is true in that sense. True, it is a true single, the word or the category of thing. Okay, we'll review this next time. I'm just sort of introducing certain things to you here now. So we're talking about, when you think about that, there's some questions about this. So false single would be the category object of knowledge or generally characterized phenomena. Generally characterized phenomena or generally characterized phenomenon, which is singular, right? Is something which is known by means of its general characteristics. So then, okay, so those are singles, false, true and false singles. Then in terms of different phenomena, we say there are false difference, something which is a false different, and something which is a true different. So now I'm introducing some more terms to here now. So the example of a false different is the pair isolate of pot and isolate of pillar. Whatever the word isolate means, you'll understand if you haven't heard already. The isolate of pot and the isolate of pillar, are they the same? No, they're different. They're different in name anyway, right? Isolate of pot what could be pointed to as an isolate of pot is the pot. It's kind of like the opposite of a non-pot. So it, non-pot means everything other than pot, right? Opposite of non-pot gets back to those little places where there's pots. We're together here? So the isolate of a pillar, these examples, pillar and pot, are classic examples in Dharmakirti's logic, because they're different, right? A pillar and a pot are different. So example of a true different is the pair pot and pillar. They're different. But the pair isolate of pot and isolate of pillar are false difference. Maybe you think about that next time we'll talk. So let me stop there, because we're doing pretty well with time so far. Let me ask you if you have any questions about what we've talked about today, or if you have any other questions about your practice, or don't ask me about politics, something about the Dharma. Rowena, you have so many questions, you know where to start.
Samsara is just a little too busy right now.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Anyway, Jamie, Yarbel, oh, Diane, Doris.
Thank you, Venerable.
Yes.
I just wanted to write down, you mentioned that they teach the young students all this terminology. You gave it a name. It wasn't Dura, it was something else. I'd just like to write that down.
In English, you could translate it as collected topics. And what it means is the various topics that are collected mainly from the 7 treatises on logic that we talked about, the Dharmakirti, we say the treatises on logic, like same and different, what are these other things that we're talking about? Negative and positive, non-affirming negations, singles and difference and so forth. All of these things that were different topics that were collected from the Pramana literature, the literature about logic and so forth. The names are given and the definitions of those names are given, and divisions of them. That provides a basis for the monks and nuns as they study later, like tenets and other things, where these terms are already assumed that you've heard the terms before and you have a general idea of what they mean. That you will be able to study those texts and the texts on logic with some familiarity. So in Tibetan, that sometimes you could call it Dura, maybe the pronunciation is more like Dudra, but anyway, the texts on Dura, they're in the Gelugpa monasteries. At Sera, mainly we study the Dura written by a former Sera monk, Gelong, called Purbachok. Purbachok was supposed to be, very high reincarnation. Maybe some people even sort of like an emanation of Maitreya. So the texts are very revered. There is a translation of much of those 3 texts. There are 3. There's the beginning, the intermediate, and the advanced collected topics that the students would always study before they studied any of these other things. Those can be found in a text called Debate in Tibetan Buddhism that Bob very kindly is holding up by what's Dan, what? Dan Perdue, Daniel Perdue. Very nice guy. I think he's still alive. Dan was a student of, is he? Bob, do you know? No, you don't know. He's not alive, or you don't know?
He's not alive. I think he died of cancer or something just recently.
Yeah, I had something. He was a student of Jeffrey Hopkins, and although many of the students took these really esoteric things like Prasangika, Madhyamika, or Tantrika as the topics of their thesis, Dan took collected topics, the very first text as his thesis, and this book is still to this day is considered to be the Bible if you want to understand collected topics. So apparently, is it still available? I think you could buy it on Amazon, yeah. So it's a big, thick tome. Look at that, yeah, I don't know how many pages, 1,000 pages or 800 pages or what?
Around 900 pages.
900 pages. So it's not something, that you're going to read in one sitting, but it has all of these subjects. It's a great reference. If, like Bob, you have a library like Bob's, you've got to have Debate in Tibetan Buddhism. You see his text behind him there. So you may be able to find a PDF of that if you're clever on the web. And you can look up these subjects like single and different, or one and many, and these different things. Also the niceties of debate and so forth. They're all explained in that Tibetan debate.
Sounds perfect,
Okay. Yeah.
especially a PDF, for searching.
Pardon me?
The PDF would be great for searching instead of, thumbing through pages.
Yes. That's one of the advantages of the PDFs. Is it available as a, what do they call it, a mobile book?
No, I've never seen it like that. He does have a more recent book
Kindle.
out on debate, which isn't as thorough as this one, that you can get electronically.
What
on
is that one
Kindle.
called?
It's-
Oh, that's okay, but it's not called Debate in Tibetan Buddhism.
I have it up right now on the internet. I'll post it in the chat box.
Yeah, it's called The Course in Buddhist Reasoning and Debate, again by Daniel Perdue. And that's more recently published.
And that's kind of a condensation or more about,
Well, yeah, it's not as thorough. It's not as good, but it covers pretty much the same ground.
right.
So I don't know if you can read that.
I put it in the text box if you want to read that newer one. I'm
Okay,
going to until I find the other one. And when I find that, I'll give it to you too.
okay, excellent.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yes,
Vessel.
so let's, in our final minute, let's do a dedication of the merits. It's said that the 3 times that are very important in an action are the beginning, the middle, and the end. So the beginning means to have a good motivation, which is kind of like the motive force, like the inertia, whatever, even if your mind gets scattered during the performance of an action, like listening to the teachings or making prostrations, by the motivation at the beginning, it can kind of color that whole period of action positively. Then the individual the individual moments of the action are the middle, and you want to try to have concentration and wisdom and not be distracted during that. And at the end, it's very important to dedicate the merits that you've created, because even if you've created merits because you've had a good motivation at the beginning, those merits can be destroyed later by anger and so forth. They can ripen in ways that are no use to your spiritual evolution, such as being generous one lifetime and then the next lifetime being born with great resources. And as a result of that, those great resources becoming miserly. Maybe the first life you were generous, And as a result of that, you have great resources. Because you didn't dedicate those merits for spiritual evolution, the delusions can arise and you can become avaricious, miserly. You can, due to the practice of morality one lifetime, undedicated, you can be born with an attractive form, be very handsome or beautiful. And as a result of that, if it's not dedicated, you can develop pride, what do they call it, vanity and so forth. So we wanted, for those various reasons, especially so that it's not destroyed, we want to dedicate the merits. So sitting comfortably, recalling the clear light nature of your mind for a moment. Recognize that we've created some virtuous karma today, and think, due to these merits, may they not simply ripen in samsaric happiness alone in the future. They will certainly be, the results will certainly be pleasurable if we've created virtuous karma. But in whatever way they ripen, may they become the cause of my continued spiritual development, day by day, year by year, life by life, up to and including the achievement of enlightenment. May these merits become the cause of my future enlightenment, which I'm aiming to attain strictly for the benefit of all sentient beings who've been our mothers numberless lives in the past. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In particular, may the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen already, may that not diminish, but increase more and more. Long life wishes, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in the world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I request, may your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine. You who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then for Lama Osel, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers, migrators in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. So thank you, gang. Thanks for being patient and having your dry bone crushing teeth out during the class.